I will proceed with our introduction now of Chen Guangcheng, known internationally as the Barefoot Lawyer. He was blind from infancy, did not learn how to read until his late teens. He educated himself in the law and undertook the defense of poor Chinese peasants and others, much to the irritation of the Chinese government, that consequently put him in prison for more than 4 years. And after he was let out of prison, he was put in confinement under house arrest in his own village, which, as his jailers told him, would be just as bad as the prison he had been in, which proved to be the case in the beatings he received and, unfortunately, the beatings his wife received. The world was electrified when Mr. Chen escaped and made his way to Beijing and into the U.S. Embassy. And if you will recall, that was a major diplomatic incident in which the United States, President Obama and Secretary Hillary had to decide what to do, in which case they made the right decision, and which is why we're so happy Mr. Chen is with us this evening. Since coming to the United States, he has been a senior research fellow at Catholic University, at the Witherspoon Institute, and also the Lantos Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Chen Guangcheng.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much to Bob for the invitation. I'm honored to be here tonight to talk with you about my life and work in China, and to give you a different view of China. When I was 6 months old, I lost my sight due to a high fever. It would have cost my mother about 25 cents to take me to the hospital for my illness. But she did not have the money. As a blind child in the poor village, rife with prejudice, my prospects were dismal. The best I could hope for was to learn the trade of fortune telling. When I was around 6 or 7, my peers in the village began going to school, but I was not even allowed inside the schoolhouse. I did not want to give in to fate, though, and learned as much as I could from the natural world. The heavens, the earth, and myriad creatures were my teachers. In 10 years' time, I gained an understanding of nature and its laws that for many people remain forever out of reach. In the evening, my father often read to me or told me traditional stories of heroes and common people who overcame adversity and fought for justice. These stories were fundamental to my development, giving me an ethical framework and allowing me to imagine myself in the shoes of the characters of the stories. I now had models for token action when I saw injustice happening around me. I was 18 when I finally had the opportunity to attend a school for the blind. My family was poor, and there was no assistance from the government. I often went hungry and often had no books to study from. Eventually, half-starving, I finished college with a degree in Chinese medicine. But I don't want to practice medicine because I was beginning to be interested in the law. To me, the law could cure society in ways that medicine couldn't. Because I had felt a lot of prejudice as a disabled person, I was sensitive to injustices happening around me. Gradually, I began to stand up against injustice, and in the process, I began to see that the law could be used as a tool to make the authorities abide by their own rules. I worked to help disabled people reclaim taxes and fees that had been illegally collected from them. I found a way to build a well in my village. When villagers became sick from our contaminated river water and managed to get the factory causing the pollution shut down. And in 2003, I brought a successful lawsuit against the Beijing Metro Corporation, demanding that they allow blind people to ride public transportation for free as mandated by Chinese law. The outcomes for these cases were mostly positive, but as a result, I upset the authorities, and they began to fight back. culminating in 2005, when I began an investigation into the violent one-child policy campaign that was going on in Linyi Prefecture of Shandong. Here I want to give you a little background into the one-child policy and then talk about some of our findings from the investigation. Since the policy began in 1979, 360 million forced abortions have taken place. This is the number quoted by the Communist Party itself. These abortions are carried out against the will of the mother, resulting in the death of her child and the violation of her physical person. These abortions are done at all points in pregnancy, up until even 9 months. Sometimes babies are still alive after the operation. Only to be killed by the doctors or nurses on hand. As part of the policy, all married women under age 50 are required to have a pregnancy test every 3 months under the supervision of the Population Planning Office. Even the first pregnancy for a married woman requires a permit. If a woman is found to be pregnant without a permit, they will be arrested and dragged away for a forced abortion. A woman who becomes sick or injured during the operation will not be given any special care. All these measures are still in place despite the change from a one-child to a two-child policy. In carrying out the policy, the authorities are extremely aggressive to meet mandated population limits. Packs of officials will descend on villages looking for people who have overburst. If a couple has become pregnant with an unregistered child, the couple will often try to hide, which can get the attended family and neighbors in trouble too. If officials cannot find the couple, they will arrest the family and neighbors and question them to find out where the mother is hiding. If they don't answer, relatives and neighbors are tortured until they talk. In the investigation I began in 2005, I and my friends found that in just 6 months' time, about 130,000 people had forced abortions or sterilized. An additional 600,000 people were implicated in the campaign because of familial relation and subjected to arrest, detention, and torture. After my friends and I released the findings from our investigation online, I was kidnapped, thrown in a black jail, and disappeared. I was tried in kangaroo court and sentenced to prison for 4 years, 3 months for damaging public property and disrupting traffic. After over 4 years in prison, I was released, only to find the Communist Party had ordered me and my family to be placed under illegal detention at home, with dozens of guards surrounding our home and village. They cut off our phone lines, set up cell phone jammers, installed surveillance cameras and high-powered spotlights. And all the while, the Communist Party's State Department was telling the world that, quote, Chen Guangcheng is free, end quote. After living under these conditions for some time, Wei Jing and I managed to surreptitiously record a video documenting our treatment. We later found a way to get it out. The Communist Party was enraged. On February 18th, 2011, the CCP ordered 70 or 80 thugs to storm into our home. Over a dozen of them threw my wife Wei Jing to the ground in the yard. They covered her with a quilt. Standing on the edges to muffle her cries from the neighbors. They kicked her viciously, breaking ribs and fracturing the bones of her eye socket. Another bunch of thugs grabbed me, stuffed a dirty rag in my mouth. And beat me and tortured me. Other thugs searched our home with metal detectors, looking for any equipment we had, like cell phones, radios, and video cameras. After many hours, they left us locked inside, refusing us badly needed medical care. Word gradually began to get out about what was happening to us. This caught the attention of netizens in China and abroad, as well as human rights organizations and Western governments, inspiring many people to make the journey to my village as a kind of protest as witness. But they were routinely beaten and had belongings stolen by the guards. The actor Christian Bale, known for playing Batman, tried to come see me. His experience was filmed by cameraman traveling with him.
Why can I not go visit this man?
Hollywood actor Christian Bale is used to action, but this is no movie set.
We've been stopped.
Plainclothes Chinese security who would not identify themselves determined to stop him and our crew contacting a detained human rights activist.
No, watch it, Christian. Watch it. We're trying to get out of here. Once again, we've been stopped. We've been stopped right here. And as you can see, they're pushing Christian here. We're just trying to leave peacefully. We're trying to leave peacefully. They're not letting us.
As we leave, the guards give chase in their car.
They're still right on our tail.
Christian Bale says this is not what he'd hoped for. He'd made an 8-hour car journey from Beijing to try to meet a personal hero, the blind self-taught lawyer Chen Guangcheng.
You know, I'm not being brave doing this. The local people who are standing up to the authorities and insisting on going to visit Chen and his family and getting beaten up for it, and my understanding is being detained for it and everything. You know, I want to support what they're doing.
Bale has been in China for the premiere of a film he's made here about the Japanese invasion of Nanjing in the 1930s. Bale could have rolled up the red carpet and left, but the actor, whose movie is about suffering and injustice, could not leave China without highlighting this real-life struggle. Chen Guangcheng has campaigned against alleged forced abortions and the treatment of villagers in China. In 2006, he was sentenced to more than 4 years in prison for disrupting traffic and damaging property. He denies those allegations. Chen has not been allowed to leave his home since his release last year. Local Chinese authorities in Shandong province have his house and local village in lockdown. No one allowed in to see Chen. Authorities here declined to comment on the case. The United States has championed Chen's cause. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has raised his case during past visits to the region. Christian Bale now wants to add whatever weight he can.
I mean, this doesn't come naturally to me, but this was just a situation I said, I can't look the other way.
Bale has followed CNN's coverage of Chen's case and approached us to try to meet the blind activist. His hopes were high until this.
What I really wanted to do was shake the man's hand and say thank you and tell him what an inspiration he is.
The Chinese security continued to chase us for more than half an hour. We got away. Chen remains locked in his house. Stan Grant, CNN, Shandong, China.
As you can see, even Christian Bale, Batman, couldn't fly past the guards. No one could visit us, and we couldn't go out. The guards even lived in our house 24 hours a day. That August, some officials and guards came to our house as part of a campaign to intimidate us. They threatened me, saying that the Communist Party would make me pay for the more than 90,000 babies who had been born as a result of the work we had done. Every day, I racked my brain trying to think of how to get free. For over a year, my wife Wei Jing and I scrutinized our situation, the guards, and our surroundings. We made many failed attempts. At last, after nearly 20 months in captivity, I found an opening, a few seconds, when their view was blacked, and began my escape. I was alone. Over the next 20 hours, I scored 8 walls and crossed 9 rings of guards. I broke 3 bones in my foot and crawled on my hands and knees out of my village, through a forest, across fields and streams, and over a river to a neighboring village. My clothes were torn and bloody. I finally made it to the American Embassy in Beijing, and later to the United States, beyond the reach of the Communist Party. I have written about my escape and my life in China in my memoir, The Best Lawyer. China does have laws, but as an authoritarian country. It lacks the rule of law. In China, the CCP uses the law as a tool to control the people. This is completely contrary to most modern democratic nations, where the law is a mechanism to benefit society. In China, laws that benefit the party are widely enforced. Laws that do not benefit the party are no better than scrap paper. The Communist Party has been persecuting its own people for decades. In July of 2015, it began what has come to be known as the 709 crackdown. For over a year, I have been getting word of lawyers, activists, netizens, and artists being disappeared, brutalized, and tortured, including many of my friends and colleagues. My friend Li Chunfu had just gotten his law license when I first met him years ago. He was detained in the crackdown and held for about 1 year and a half. This past January 12th, he was released, but his wife found him a changed man, once healthy and bright. He was now cowering, paranoid, terrified, unable to look friends and family in the eye. He had clearly undergone extreme trauma that had left him fundamentally damaged and his family bereft. My friend, attorney Xie Yang, had been detained illegal for over a year and a half. When he was finally allowed a visit from his lawyer, Xie Yang's lawyer has reported that Xie Yang wept as he told of how he had been tortured and was terrified he would die in prison, of how he is ill and is being refused medical treatment. Xie Yang cried as he told of how he would stand near the tiny window of the secret detention facility where he had been held, calling out when he heard footsteps, hoping that someone would tell his wife and children where he was, that he was still alive. Since Xie Yang's lawyer publicized this account in January, the Communist Party has not allowed Xie's lawyers to visit him. Attorneys Li Heping, Jiang Tianyong, Wang Quanzhang, Zhang Haitao, and many others are facing untold traumas in secret detention centers, including torture by electric shock, all for wanting to make China a better place. Unfortunately, people have been tortured to death in prison, as was recently the case with Peng Ming, a human rights activist who had been kidnapped from abroad and sentenced to life in jail. He was in prison for 12 years when just recently the authorities notified his family that he had, quote, died of a heart attack. The authorities promptly removed his organs, including his heart and brains, to prevent forensic analysis into the cause of death. In the 709 crackdown, the authorities unlawfully deny that they have detained access to lawyers. The CCP uses torture and threats to family members to force people to dismiss their retained lawyers. Many, in fact, are forced to make public confessions of their so-called crimes. On the CCP mouthpieces like China Central TV, violating not only international law, but China's law on self-incrimination. This is China today, under the control of the Communist Party. Unfortunately, many people outside China only hear about economic advancement. Since I got to America in 2012, I have not stopped speaking out about the truth of what is happening in China. I am in constant contact with activists, netizens, and human rights lawyers inside and outside China. And I speak to media outlets on a range of topics related to human rights in China. And the influence of the CCP on the US. I have established a foundation here in the US to continue the work I was doing in China, looking at issues such as internet freedom and the rule of law. We now have a website, www.cgc-foundation.org, where you can look at our work. In addition, I'm committed to the complete abolishment of the population and reproduction planning system. Despite the ongoing oppression by the communist authority, people in China are gradually awakening. They are less afraid of power and are inspired by the actions of those around them to stand up. The Chinese people know that they must rely on themselves to protect their rights. They know that maintaining their rights will require long-term and seizing efforts. As people overcome their fear, transformation will come to China. I look forward to talking with you and answering any question you may have about my life in China, my work, or my foundation. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
When I did the grad degree at Yale, I did some classes in law school there, and they have a Chinese Studies Center that supposedly studies Chinese legal developments and supposedly does a lot of work in trying to create the rule of law in China. I know a lot of other major law schools, supposedly well-respected in the United States, do the same thing. Have you seen any positive benefit of any of their work in there, or are they so determined to please the Chinese government and maintain their standing in China that they don't really do what's necessary to truly create the basis for rule of law there?
就是他说他的业务毕业，他知道业务有从事研究中国法律的这个中心啊或者项目，他觉得他们的目的是想促进帮助中国理解法治，并且促进中国法治的建设。你觉得这些工作对中国的法治方面的建设有什么意义吗？
我觉得这样，如果你们觉得中国共产党的这个司法系统的人不懂法，你们教他们，那这个路就别走了。他们比谁都明白， 他们心里清清楚楚的他们在做坏事，他们只是为了共产党，不是为了中国。
In a sense, if you think that you can teach the communist rulers regarding law and those in working in jurisdiction what law means, and that you are doomed to fail because they understand clearly what they're doing. They know they're doing some bad thing, they're evil in any of the thing that they got involved.
如果是过去你们想帮助中国的民间机构或者中国觉醒的百姓利用法律来维护自己的权利，那么我觉得我应该感谢你。过去的确取得了非常重要的效果，很多人懂得了自己的权利来维护权利，但是未来这个作用已经不大了，因为中国人民已经看清楚共产党是不会守法的。
Well, in the past, that I would say we are very grateful for the work of the NGO and who help. The Western organization or government who help the NGO in China grassroots activities and which help them make some progress to realize that they have the rights, they have the law that in the paper to protect them, but in the future, I would say that everybody understand that the Communist Party do not follow the rule of law.
Thank you.
Has the recent introduction of capitalism in China helped in any way with the civil rights of the people in China?
你觉得这是天主教，比如在中国的有些复兴的迹象的话，对人权的这个进步有什么意义吗？
我觉得怎么说呢？这些首先，中国涌现出来的很多维权律师也好，维权人士也好，有相当的比例是宗教信仰者，这一点我们没有办法否认。但是我觉得在中国呢，就是说，只要能打破中共这种一党垄断的，特别是在思想上的这样的模式，都会对中国的变革起着非常重要的帮助。
As we see that some lawyers, particularly the human rights lawyers, and they defend human rights for people on the general perspective, but many of them are religious activities as well. But there's only one way that to break through the one-party rule in China. Otherwise, we can't see any hope in realizing the rule of law in China.
I'm sure your foundation addresses this, but I was wondering what would be your advice or encouragement to civil rights lawyers in China who are practicing now?
你觉得就是从你建立基金会以后，就是你在促进中国的这些人权方面有哪些建议和想法？
实际上呢，我们的基金会刚刚运行，所以时间并不长。另一方面呢，始终我们也曾跟中国国内的朋友保持联系。其实很多，我们当然目前呢，就是说让中共想关起门来做坏事，想在黑箱里操作一些案子来迫害人，变得非常非常的艰难。
Well, we have just started, but we always in contact with those human rights lawyers and grassroots activities there. And our work in joint efforts make it very, very difficult for the communist regime to do some evils behind the door.
In the next 4 years, what, if anything, can President Trump do in his relations with the Chinese government to improve the well-being of the Chinese people?
你觉得今后4年里头，你对川普政府对改进中国的民生福祉有什么样的想法？
我觉得如果川普总统能够结束专制政权，那么这不仅仅是对中国和中国人民的一种帮助和福祉，也是对全世界一种 福祉，和做出的莫大贡献。因为我们看到呢，中共专制集团已经不仅仅是在危害中国人民，它的魔爪已经伸向世界各个地方，包括美国的媒体、美国的学术自由都受到中共的收买和威胁，这个影响是非常大的。我希望非常注意这一点。所以灭专制、灭共产、中共，就是对全人类做最大的贡献。
I would say that I hope that Mr. President Trump would be a great contributor if he could end authoritarian, not only in China, not only benefit the Chinese people, but also the whole world. Because you can see the communist regime and what they have been harming not only the Chinese people, but now they are reaching out throughout the world, in almost every corner, including the United States. For example, the infiltration in the media and academic field. And we really want to see the end of authoritarian in China and the communist rule in China.
共产专制政权对全世界的威胁，不仅仅是说它的军事有多么强大，主要是它对人类的文明、价值、文化的破坏，这个是非常非常可怕的，我们必须警惕。如果川普总统能够结束像中共这样的专制集团，那可能我们人类从此真正就走上全面的民主，而一个没有专制的这样一个社会，那它将是人类最大的总统，这也是最伟大的事业。
When we talk about the communist regime and you see China rising or whatever, is not a military power, but its harm or damage or the civilization of the whole world and the culture and the values that we share, which I think that if President Trump could end the communist regime and the authoritarian there, and that's the biggest contribution he has ever made to the whole world, and that will make him one of the greatest presidents in history.
Thank you.
May I ask, what has the Chinese government done to try to keep you quiet here in the United States?
就是共产党试图做些什么事儿，企图使你在美国沉默下去，这感觉。
其实共产党在这方面真的是做了非常多的工作。一方面，他们对我的家人，在中国的家人进行威胁啊，半夜往家里扔石头啊、扔啤酒瓶啊，对其殴打，也派人用刀子把我家人的车胎都给扎破了。那么，还有就是，即使在美国来，我想好多事情可能没有引起大家的注意，实际中共也从来没有放弃对我的控制啊。比如说以前我刚到美国时间不长，中共就派一个前人大代表向这个纽约大学的捐款2500万美金，这背后究竟有什么东西？我们可能大家慢慢的去了解吧。总之我不想就这问题说太多。总之就是他没有停止对我的控制，还曾经派人到我的家里去，把老鼠药放到我的面粉袋子旁边，这是对我赤裸裸的威胁。
And I can tell you that the communist regime never stopped intimate me and my family is back in China, and they did a lot of things. For example, they intimate by throwing rocks into the homes of my family there, and they destroyed the tire of their vehicle, and even when I was in New York University, for example, and they hired one of their former, the so-called communist, the People's Congress deputies, with a donation of $25 million to NYU, try to silence me. And there are, of course, many other things behind the scenes. And you are going to learn more gradually. And one horrific thing I want to share with you, because when I moved here not long ago, and we find a bag of poison to kill rats next to our flower bag.
Any other questions, Jack?
Thank you for the presentation, and excuse me for my lack of knowledge, but does your work, has it overlapped with religious groups and human rights issues concerning them? And could you comment on the characterization of their situation in China as well?
就是说他不太了解，就是你做的工作就对这个人权和宗教信仰方面有什么交叉的地方吗？或者能不能简单做一些介绍，在中国的一些类似的情况？
人权和宗教信仰。
就他觉得好像就是人权和宗教是不是有些什么样的？你觉得他们之间有什么样的关系？
我觉得宗教信仰自由本身就是人的权利的一部分，对吧？人在这方面有着绝对自己决定自己的信仰什么的权利，这个是毫无疑问的。但是在中国不是这样，中国他要求你只相信共产主义，只相信共产党，那么任何与共产党就是跟他不一致，而且有了一定影响的话，不管你是什么，中共都会去打压。那这个就让中国就失去了自由选择的权利，不管是在信仰上还是在其他方面。那我们对这方面的支持，就是让大家捍卫自己的人权、自由权、表达权、信仰权，这个当然就是人权，对吧？人权就像水和食物、空气一样，其实是分布在我们生活的方方面面，跟任何一个东西都是不能分开的。
We all know that religion freedom is one of the most fundamental human rights. And but in China, you are not allowed to choose your faith, and you have to follow the party line to believe in communism or the communist rule. So, especially when you have becoming a kind of influence to promote human rights or religion freedom, you will definitely be in trouble with the government. But if you don't have the freedom of faith, among other things, how can you become a civilized society? For example, we believe the fundamental rights, including expression, religions, or faith, and they're just like air and water in your daily life. So every aspect of your life, you depend on them.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about our country, and what have you found since you've been here to be a surprise, either good or bad?
就是你觉得来美国以后，你发现哪些让你感到意外的吗？
我没有太大的意外吧。我只是唯一一个意外就是，可能共产党对美国的渗透程度是超出我的想象的。除此之外，其他的我觉得没有什么。我觉得民主制度是一个能把人类的社会公正提高到一个最高状况的，当然不是100%，可能提高到一个最高水平的这样一个制度。当然，并不是说它完美，它也有许多需要发展改善的地方，但是它是目前比较好的一个社会制度。
Well, I would say not much surprising, but I would say one thing that really beyond my imagination or knowledge is the communist infiltration into the American society. But living in the democracy, you see the social justice, and which is moving to a higher level in the human history, and even though not perfect, there is some room to improve, but still the best we have so far.
There were what turned out to be misplaced hopes concerning the Arab Spring in the Middle East. That people did not assume democratic constitutional governance, but when the yoke had been removed, they began fighting each other. What confidence does Mr. Chen have that were the Communist Party removed in China, that the Chinese people are ready for this?
就说他根据就是阿拉伯之春造成的这个结果，就是那些阿拉伯人就是获得了这个一定的民主权利以后，他们自己相互的争斗，并没有好像朝着这个民主社会和平发展。你觉得如果中国共产党下台以后，那么中国人民准备好了建设自己的民主国家或社会吗？
我觉得可能在中国结束专制以后，短时间内啊，大家会有一个学习和使用民主制衡制度的过程，就像台湾一样，80年代、90年代也不是那么的完善，但是我们看到2000年以后呢，成熟多了。当然也还需要不断的完善成熟，但它已经成熟多了。我想中国，特别是现在很多中国人民已经清楚地认识到民主社会、民主制衡的这个权力架构、新闻自由的这种社会状态对于提高社会公正的重要性。我想将来虽然没有办法避免一些问题出来，但是根本问题没有了。我相信几年之后，中国的民主就会像今天的台湾一样逐步的成熟起来。
And well, when the authoritarian regime come to an end in China, we're going to experience the learning phase and learning how to exercise the balance of power, just like what happened in Taiwan in the 80s and 90s when they started democratization. But after 2000, and they seem to be growing up a lot and getting maturalized. And I think that China, the same thing would happen too. And people learn to use the balance of power and press freedom, so on and so forth, after the communist regime gone. But that's basically a learning experience.
我觉得其实中国现在是一个下至而上愚的社会，很多下至上愚就是很多聪明的人都在民间，是不能融入中共这样一个邪恶系统的。如果你很正直，你说真话，你在这个系统里就不能活。所以说那个时候这些人都可以站出来发挥作用。还有就是，你看东德和西德，南韩与北朝鲜，这不是太鲜活的例子吗？这样的东西就摆在我们面前，所以这不是问题，只需要我们去做。现在是中共挡在那儿，不让这个社会变好。
Well, there's one fact I must tell you. There are many people who are honest, smart. They refuse to join the communist regime. They are the grassroots elements. And when they, because they can't bear the evil regime there, and they don't want to be part of it. And also for democracy, we can see from history the East Germany and West Germany, and North Korea and South Korea. So democracy is definitely the best choice that people have in history and for the future.
Thank you.
Please join me in
Thank you. Thank you.